My name is Rufus. I'm 28 years old, and I never thought I'd have to press charges against my own parents. When my phone rang that Wednesday afternoon, and the bank representative told me someone was trying to transfer the deed to my house using forged documents, my heart stopped. Finding out it was my mom and dad behind it felt like being stabbed in the chest by the people who were supposed to love me most. Before I share this painful story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to family who tried to take advantage of you. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Portland with my older brother Bradley, who's 34 now, and my parents Frank and Denise, 62 and 58 respectively. We weren't wealthy, but we never lacked the essentials. My father worked as an insurance adjuster while my mother was a part-time receptionist at a dental office. On the surface, we looked like your average American family, but beneath that facade lay a troubling dynamic that I only fully understood as an adult. From my earliest memories, it was clear that Bradley was the golden child. When he scored a C on his report card, our parents would take him out for ice cream as a reward for trying. Meanwhile, my straight A's were met with casual nods and comments like, "That's what we expect from you anyway." This pattern continued throughout our childhood and teenage years. Bradley got a car for his 16th birthday despite his mediocre grades. I had to work summers at the local grocery store to save up for my first beater. As we entered adulthood, our diverging paths became even more apparent. Bradley dropped out of community college after 3 semesters, claiming it wasn't challenging enough. He bounced between jobs, never staying at one place longer than 6 months. By 25, he had launched and bankrupted 2 businesses, a lawn care service that collapsed when he failed to show up for appointments, and a phone repair shop that closed after customers complained about damaged devices. Despite these failures, my parents continued to finance his endeavors and bail him out of tight spots. "Your brother is just finding himself," my mother would say. "He's a free spirit with an entrepreneurial mind." What they called entrepreneurial, I saw as irresponsible. Meanwhile, I followed a more conventional path. I studied hard, earned a scholarship to State University, and graduated with a degree in computer science. After graduation, I landed a job at a software company where I quickly moved up from junior developer to project lead. I lived frugally, shared an apartment with 2 roommates, brought lunch from home, and saved every penny I could. At 26, after 4 years of disciplined saving and careful planning, I achieved what felt impossible. I purchased my first home. It wasn't anything extravagant, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a developing neighborhood that needed some work, but it was mine. The day I got my keys, I felt a pride I can't fully describe. No one in my family had ever owned property before. I was the first. When I invited my family over to see my new house, I expected at least some recognition of my achievement. Instead, Bradley walked through the rooms pointing out flaws. "This kitchen is tiny. The backyard needs a lot of work. Did you know this neighborhood has crime issues?" My parents seemed uncomfortable with my success, offering lukewarm congratulations before quickly changing the subject to Bradley's latest scheme, opening a food truck despite having no culinary experience. That evening set the tone for what would become a pattern. My accomplishments were downplayed, while Bradley's most minor efforts were celebrated. When I received a promotion at work, my mother responded, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Bradley is dating someone new? She's a marketing executive." The woman turned out to be an entry-level social media coordinator who broke up with him after 3 weeks. The tension between us grew as my career advanced while Bradley continued to struggle. At family gatherings, Bradley would make snide remarks about corporate sellouts and how people like me were part of the problem with America. My parents never defended me, sometimes even nodding along with his baseless criticisms. Despite the growing strain, I continued trying to maintain a relationship with my family. I showed up for holidays, remembered birthdays, and even loaned Bradley money twice, funds I never saw again. I convinced myself that family was family, and surely my parents' favoritism wasn't as deliberate as it felt. I told myself they loved us both equally, just in different ways. Looking back, I was in denial about how unhealthy our family dynamic had become. I kept hoping that eventually my parents would acknowledge my achievements and that Bradley would mature into a responsible adult. Neither happened, and instead, the situation deteriorated in ways I could never have imagined. Everything came to a head last summer during what should have been a routine family dinner. My mother had invited me over for her famous pot roast, insisting the whole family needed to get together. "It's been too long since we've all sat down together," she said, though it had only been 3 weeks since Easter. When I arrived, Bradley was already there, nursing a beer and looking unusually somber. My father sat in his recliner, the evening news muted in the background. The tension in the room was palpable, and I immediately sensed this wasn't just a casual family dinner. After we sat down to eat, Bradley dropped his bombshell. "Tanya and I are getting divorced." Tanya was his wife of 4 years. I'd only met her a handful of times since Bradley tended to keep his relationships separate from family gatherings. "She's taking the house in the settlement," he continued. "I've got 30 days to find a new place." My mother reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "It's not fair," she said, "after everything you've done for her." From the little I knew, Bradley hadn't done much for Tanya. He'd been unemployed for most of their marriage, while she worked 2 jobs to support them. But I kept these thoughts to myself, and offered a generic, "I'm sorry to hear that." My father cleared his throat. "We've been talking, and we think we have a solution," he said, exchanging glances with my mother. "Rufus, you've got that big house all to yourself. Bradley could move in with you until he gets back on his feet." The request caught me off guard. My big house was less than 1,500 square feet, and I'd converted the second bedroom into a home office where I often worked late into the evening. The third bedroom was more of a large closet than an actual room. But beyond the practical constraints, I knew from past experience that until he gets back on his feet could mean months or even years. "I don't think that would work," I said carefully. "My place isn't really set up for a roommate, and my job requires a quiet environment for working from home." Bradley scoffed. "You have 3 bedrooms and it's just you. Don't be so selfish." "It's not about being selfish," I countered. "It's about having established my own space and routine." My mother's face fell. I thought family helped each other in times of need. The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable silence, with my parents shooting disappointed glances my way while Bradley sulked over his plate. I left feeling guilty, despite knowing my boundaries were reasonable. 3 days later, I received a text from my father asking me to come over to discuss an important family matter. Thinking perhaps Bradley had found another solution, or that they wanted to apologize for putting me on the spot, I agreed. When I arrived, my parents and Bradley were sitting at the kitchen table with a folder of papers between them. My mother motioned for me to sit down. "We've given this a lot of thought," my father began, "and we believe we've found the best solution for everyone." My mother nodded. "Bradley needs stability right now, especially with the 2 children to think about." This was news to me. Bradley has children? As far as I knew, he and Tanya had been childless. "My stepchildren," Bradley clarified. "Tanya's kids from her first marriage. I've been their father figure for 4 years." My father pushed the folder toward me. "We think the most sensible solution is for you to transfer ownership of your house to Bradley." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "Transfer my house? You mean sell it to him?" "Not exactly," my mother said gently. "Sign it over. You're young, single, just starting out. You can find another place or move into an apartment. Bradley needs a stable home for his family situation." I stared at them in disbelief. "You want me to give Bradley my house? The house I saved for years to buy? The house I've put thousands of dollars of renovations into?" "It's just a house," Bradley said dismissively. "You can buy another one. I have nowhere to go." "And whose fault is that?" I shot back, my shock turning to anger. "I worked hard for what I have. I didn't get handouts or bailouts. My mother's expression hardened. No one is asking for handouts. We're talking about family supporting each other. Bradley has always been there for you. This revisionist history was too much. When? When has Bradley ever been there for me? When has he ever put my needs before his own? Don't talk to your mother like that, my father warned. This attitude is exactly why we worry about you. Success has made you selfish and cold. I stood up, pushing the folder back across the table. I'm not signing over my house. This conversation is insane. If Bradley needs help, I can loan him money for a security deposit on an apartment, but my house is not on the table. Loan him money? My mother laughed bitterly. So he can be in debt to his younger brother? How humiliating. More humiliating than asking me to give away my house? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Bradley stood up, his face red with anger. This is why I didn't want to ask him. He's always been like this, thinking he's better than everyone else because he got lucky with a tech job. Lucky? I worked my ass off through college while you were dropping out. I saved every penny while you blew through money like it was nothing. I was shouting now. Years of resentment, bubbling to the surface. My father stood between us. That's enough. Rufus, you need to think about someone other than yourself for once. Take the papers home, read them over, and do the right thing. I grabbed my keys instead. There's nothing to think about. The house is mine. I'm not giving it to Bradley or anyone else. Find another solution. I left with my parents' disappointed faces and Bradley's glare burning into my back. As I drove home, I kept asking myself if I was being selfish. Was I wrong to refuse? But every time I considered giving in, I reminded myself of all the sacrifices I'd made to buy my home. No, I wasn't being selfish. I was protecting what I'd rightfully earned. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would test the very meaning of family and force me to make choices I never imagined I'd face. The days following my refusal turned into a psychological war of attrition. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my parents and Bradley, ranging from guilt-tripping to outright hostility. After everything we've done for you, my mother texted. This is how you repay us? From my father. Your selfishness is tearing this family apart. Is a house worth more than your brother's well-being? Bradley's messages were more direct. You've always had everything handed to you while I struggled. The least you could do is help me this one time. I stopped responding after the first day, unable to reason with their distorted version of reality where I was somehow the villain for not giving away my most valuable possession. The campaign soon expanded beyond my immediate family. My Aunt Susan called, her voice dripping with disappointment. Your mother is in tears every day over this situation. How can you be so heartless? My cousin Patrick cornered me at a gas station. Man, family is everything. You can always buy another house, but you only get one brother. Even my childhood friend Thomas, who had remained close to my parents over the years, reached out. Look, I know it's your house, but maybe there's a compromise? Could Bradley rent from you at least? It seemed my parents had contacted everyone in our social circle, spinning a narrative where I was the selfish son refusing to help his struggling brother. Most painful was the realization that no one was asking why Bradley, at 34, couldn't secure his own housing. No one questioned why my parents didn't offer their own home to him. The burden of solving Bradley's problems had somehow become exclusively mine. After 2 weeks of this barrage, I made the decision to step back from all family contact. I blocked their numbers temporarily, muted family group chats, and told friends I wasn't discussing the situation anymore. I needed space to clear my head and reaffirm that I wasn't crazy for wanting to keep my own property. The reprieve lasted exactly 16 days. I was returning home from work on a Thursday evening, exhausted from a day of debugging a problematic software release. As I turned onto my street, I immediately spotted Bradley's faded blue Subaru in my driveway. My stomach knotted with anxiety. I hadn't given him a key, so at least he couldn't be inside. but his presence alone violated the boundary I'd tried to establish. I parked on the street and approached warily. Bradley was sitting on my front steps, a duffel bag beside him. When he saw me, he stood up with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, little brother," he said, as if the past few weeks hadn't happened. "Thought I'd take you up on that offer to crash here for a bit." "What offer?" I kept my distance, keys clutched tightly in my hand. "I never offered for you to stay here," he waved dismissively. "You said you wouldn't give me the house but would help with a security deposit. I figured staying here while I apartment hunt would be even better. Save us both some money." "That's not what I meant, and you know it," I said firmly. "I can't have you staying here, Bradley." His fake smile vanished. "Can't or won't. Because from where I'm standing, you have plenty of space and no reason to refuse except being a selfish prick." "It's my house," I repeated, a phrase that had become my mantra. "I get to decide who stays here." Bradley stepped closer, his body language shifting from casual to threatening. "Listen to me carefully. I'm not leaving until I have a place to go, and since you're the reason I don't have options, you're going to let me stay." "I'm the reason?" I couldn't believe his twisted logic. "How exactly am I responsible for your divorce or housing situation? If you had signed over the house like Mom and Dad asked, I wouldn't be in this mess." His voice rose to a shout. "But no, you had to be difficult." Several neighbors had come out onto their porches, watching the confrontation unfold. I lowered my voice, trying to de-escalate. "Bradley, you need to leave. This isn't going to happen." "Make me," he challenged, spreading his arms wide. "Go ahead and try to remove me from what should be my property anyway." I took out my phone. "I'm calling the police if you don't leave right now." "Do it," he sneered. "Call them. I'll tell them how you've abandoned your family, how you're hoarding wealth while your brother is homeless." Despite his bravado, I could see the surprise in his eyes when I actually dialed 911. He probably expected me to back down as I had so many times in our childhood. Not this time. "Hello? I need assistance with removing an unwanted person from my property," I said clearly into the phone, maintaining eye contact with Bradley. His face contorted with rage. "You're calling the cops on your own brother? What kind of person does that?" I remained calm as I gave the dispatcher my address. As soon as I hung up, Bradley kicked his duffel bag and stormed toward me. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "This isn't over. That house should be mine, and one way or another, I'm going to get it." "Is that a threat?" I asked, standing my ground despite my racing heart. "It's a promise." He spat before getting into his car and peeling out of my driveway, tires screeching against the asphalt. The police arrived 15 minutes later. I explained the situation, emphasizing Bradley's threatening behavior and final words. They took notes, advised me to consider a restraining order if the harassment continued, and promised to drive by my house periodically over the next few days. That night, I received a barrage of furious messages from my parents. My father called me dead to the family for involving the police. My mother's message was shorter but cut deeper. "I don't recognize the son I raised. Your brother is family. The police are strangers. You've chosen strangers over blood." I turned off my phone and sat in my dark living room, the house I had worked so hard for now feeling more like a fortress under siege than a home. For the first time, I wondered if it might be easier to sell the house and move somewhere my family couldn't find me. But even as the thought formed, I rejected it. This was my home. I had earned it, and I refused to be bullied out of it by the people who should have been proudest of my achievement. What I didn't realize then was that the worst was yet to come. The confrontation at my house wasn't the end of their campaign to take what was mine. It was merely the prelude to something far more sinister. 1 month after the driveway confrontation, I was at work when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Usually, I let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer this time. "Is this Rufus Montgomery?" a woman's voice asked. Yes, this is Rufus. Mr. Montgomery, this is Sandra Wilson from First National Bank. I'm calling about some paperwork that was submitted regarding your property on Maple Street. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of paperwork? We received deed transfer documents yesterday for your property. The paperwork shows you transferring ownership to a Bradley Montgomery. Before processing, we conduct verification calls for transactions of this nature. The room seemed to tilt around me. I never submitted any transfer documents. I haven't signed anything. There was a pause on the line. Sir, we have transfer documents with what appears to be your signature, notarized and submitted according to protocol. That's impossible, I said, my voice rising. I never signed anything. Someone must have forged my signature. This is a serious allegation, Mr. Montgomery, Sandra said, her tone shifting to professional concern. If you believe fraud has occurred, you should contact the police immediately. In the meantime, I'll place a hold on this transaction. Please do, I said. I'll be contacting the police right away. After hanging up, I sat frozen at my desk, the implications washing over me like ice water. Someone had attempted to steal my house through forged documents. And, given recent events, I had a sickening certainty about who was behind it. I called my supervisor, explained I had a family emergency, and left work immediately. My first stop was the police station, where I filed a report about the attempted fraud. The officer taking my statement listened carefully as I explained the ongoing conflict with my family. Unfortunately, we see this kind of thing more often than you might think, he said. Family members thinking they can get away with fraud because blood ties will prevent the victim from pressing charges. I want to press charges, I said firmly. If my suspicions are correct about who's behind this. The officer nodded. We'll need to investigate, get copies of the documents from the bank, and determine who submitted them. We'll also need to speak with the notary who allegedly witnessed your signature. From the police station, I drove to the bank to meet with Sandra in person. She showed me the documents, and sure enough, there was my signature on the deed transfer, alongside a notary stamp from Gerald's Professional Notary Services in a neighboring town. I've never heard of this notary service, I told Sandra. And this isn't my signature. It's close, but definitely forged. She made copies of everything for my records and assured me the transfer was now blocked. Next, I drove to Gerald's Professional Notary Services, hoping to catch them before they closed for the day. The small office was tucked between a laundromat and a vape shop in a strip mall. Inside, a balding man in his 60s looked up from a desk, cluttered with rubber stamps and paperwork. "Can I help you?" he asked. I introduced myself and explained the situation, showing him the copy of the document bearing his notary stamp. Gerald frowned as he examined it. I remember this transaction. 3 people came in together 2 days ago, an older couple and a younger man. The older gentleman introduced the younger one as Rufus Montgomery and said they needed a property deed notarized. My heart sank. Did the person claiming to be Rufus show identification? Gerald shifted uncomfortably. He said he'd left his wallet in the car. The older gentleman said he was the father vouched for him. Since they were family and the older couple had their IDs, I made an exception. He looked genuinely remorseful. That was wrong of me, wasn't it? Very wrong, I confirmed. Would you be willing to make a statement to the police about what happened? Gerald agreed immediately, clearly worried about the implications for his notary license. Before leaving, I asked if he had security cameras. He pointed to a small camera in the corner, explaining it kept footage for 30 days. That could be crucial evidence, I told him. The police moved quickly after I provided Gerald's information. They obtained the security footage, which clearly showed my parents and Bradley at the notary office, with Bradley signing my name on the documents. 2 days later, I received a call from Detective Laura Simmons, who had been assigned to my case. "Mr. Montgomery, we've completed our initial investigation, and I wanted to update you personally," she said. "The evidence is quite clear. Your parents, Frank and Denise Montgomery, along with your brother Bradley Montgomery, conspired to commit real estate fraud through forgery and false representation. Despite suspecting this all along, hearing it confirmed sent a wave of nausea through me. What happens now? I asked. We're preparing to make arrests, Detective Simmons said gently. Given the dollar amount involved, this constitutes felony fraud. Before we proceed, I wanted to confirm that you wish to press charges against your family members. The question hung in the air. Did I want my parents and brother arrested? Would I be the one responsible for sending my own family to jail? For a moment, I wavered. Then I remembered Bradley's threat. One way or another, I'm going to get it. They hadn't just asked for my house or tried to guilt me into giving it away, they had attempted to steal it through criminal means. If I didn't press charges, what would stop them from trying again with a different scheme? Yes, I said finally. I want to press charges. I understand this must be difficult, Detective Simmons said. We'll proceed with the arrests tomorrow morning. That night was one of the longest of my life. I paced my house, the house my family had tried to steal, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Would this permanently destroy any chance of reconciliation? Was my property worth the complete fracturing of my family? But each time doubts crept in, I reminded myself. I wasn't the one who had chosen criminal activity over family bonds. They had made that choice when they decided to forge my signature and steal my home. The next morning, Detective Simmons called again. Mr. Montgomery, I wanted to let you know that we've taken your parents and brother into custody. During the arrest, we discovered something you should be aware of. Your brother Bradley has a prior conviction for financial fraud from 8 years ago. He served 14 months for an investment scam that targeted elderly victims. This new information stunned me. I had no idea, I admitted. My parents never mentioned anything about Bradley going to prison. People often hide these things from family out of shame, she said. But given this history, it changes the nature of the case somewhat. This would be considered a repeat offense for your brother, which carries more serious consequences. After the call ended, I sat in a daze, trying to process everything. My brother was a convicted fraudster who had already served time for a similar crime. My parents had hidden this from me, all while continuing to paint Bradley as the victim of circumstance and bad luck, rather than the consequences of his own actions. The foundation of lies upon which our family dynamics had been built was crumbling, revealing an ugly truth beneath. Bradley wasn't just irresponsible or unlucky. He was a criminal who preyed on others. And my parents weren't just overindulgent, they were enablers, who had now crossed into criminal territory themselves. That evening, I received a call from the county jail. It was my mother, her voice small and broken, asking me to help them. We didn't think it would go this far, she said. We just wanted to help Bradley get back on his feet. Please, Rufus, we're your parents. Don't do this to us. Her words, once capable of stirring deep guilt, now rang hollow. You tried to steal my house through fraud, I said. What did you think would happen? We thought you'd understand once it was done, she admitted. That you'd forgive us because we're family. The call ended with her crying and my father shouting in the background about ungrateful children. I hung up feeling numb. The family I thought I knew had been revealed as strangers willing to commit crimes against their own son, and now they expected forgiveness simply because we shared DNA. The days that followed brought more revelations as the investigation continued. The detective informed me they had uncovered evidence that Bradley had attempted similar schemes before, including trying to take out loans using the identities of former roommates. It seemed my house wasn't his first target, just the most valuable one. As I sorted through this new reality, one question kept returning. How had I never seen the truth about my brother and parents until now? Had I been so desperate for their approval that I'd willingly blinded myself to who they really were? The answer, I was beginning to realize, was yes. And that realization, painful as it was, was the first step toward finally breaking free from the toxic family dynamic that had shaped my entire life. 1 week after the arrests, I found myself sitting in a sterile visitation room at the county jail, waiting to see my parents. I hadn't planned to come, but after days of calls from relatives begging me to fix this mess, I decided a face-to-face conversation was necessary, if only to make my position absolutely clear. My parents entered together, dressed in orange jumpsuits that hung loosely on their frames. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by their surroundings. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, while my father's face was set in a hard mask of anger. 5 minutes, and you finally show up, my father said, as they sat down across from me. Nice of you to make time for your parents while we rot in jail. Frank, my mother cautioned, placing her hand on his arm. Then to me, thank you for coming, Rufus. We knew you wouldn't abandon us completely. Their complete lack of remorse was stunning. I'm not here to post bail, I said, wanting to be clear from the outset. I'm here to understand why you thought it was okay to commit fraud against your own son. My father scoffed. Fraud? It's a house, a material possession. We were trying to help your brother, our son, who was in need. Family takes care of family. By stealing? By forging documents? I leaned forward. That's not taking care of family. That's crime. We asked you first, my mother said, as if this justified everything. We only took other measures when you refused to be reasonable. Reasonable would have been accepting my no and finding another solution, I countered. Reasonable would have been offering your house to Bradley if you were so concerned about his housing situation. My father's face reddened. Our house? We're in our 60s. We need our home for retirement. You're young, you can start over. The double standard was breathtaking. So your home is essential for your security. But mine is just a dispensable asset I should hand over? You don't understand what it's like to be a parent, my mother said. Bradley has always needed more support, more help. It's our job to make sure he's okay. At my expense? By victimizing me? I shook my head. And what about Bradley's criminal record? Were you ever going to tell me about his previous fraud conviction? They exchanged glances, clearly surprised I knew about this. My father recovered first. That was a misunderstanding. Bradley was manipulated by his business partner. He took the fall for someone else's crime. Detective Simmons showed me the court records, I said. Bradley ran a Ponzi scheme that targeted retirees. He stole over $100,000 from people who could ill afford to lose it. That wasn't a misunderstanding, it was calculated theft. My mother began to cry. He made a mistake. Everyone deserves a second chance. This wasn't his second chance, I pointed out. According to the police, he's been involved in multiple fraudulent activities since his release. You've been enabling a career criminal, not a struggling son. The conversation deteriorated from there. My father accused me of betraying the family. My mother oscillated between tearful pleas and angry recriminations. Neither showed any genuine remorse for what they had done to me, only regret that they had been caught and were facing consequences. As I prepared to leave, my father made one last attempt. If you drop the charges, we can forget this ever happened. We can be a family again. I paused at the door. We can't be a family again because we were never the family I thought we were. You've made your choice repeatedly, Bradley, over me, crime over honesty. Now you're facing the consequences of those choices. From the jail, I drove directly to see Bradley, who was being held in a different section due to his prior record. If the meeting with my parents had been difficult, this one was excruciating. Bradley showed no pretense of remorse or affection. Happy now? He sneered as soon as he sat down. Got your whole family in jail so you can keep your precious house all to yourself. You put yourself here, I replied evenly. You and Mom and Dad. I was doing fine until you called the cops, he spat. My lawyer says I could get 5 to 7 years because of my record. Are you satisfied? Does ruining my life make you feel big? "You were trying to steal my house," I reminded him. "How exactly was that doing fine?" Bradley leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I have 2 kids to take care of. Did you ever think about them?" This claim again. "You don't have children, Bradley. You've been divorced from Tanya for months, and her children have a father. They're still my responsibility," he insisted. "I was the one taking care of them while their real dad was nowhere to be found." I decided to press further. "Where are these children now?" He hesitated, just long enough to confirm my suspicions. "With their grandmother, Tanya's mom." "So they're safe and cared for," I noted. "Your criminal actions weren't about protecting children at all. They were about taking something that didn't belong to you because you felt entitled to it." Bradley's facade cracked. "You've always had it easy. Everything handed to you while I had to struggle." "Nothing was handed to me," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I worked for everything I have. The difference between us isn't luck or favoritism, it's choices. You chose short-term schemes over long-term stability. You chose to defraud people instead of earning an honest living." "Easy to say, from your high horse," he sneered. "Some of us don't have the luxury of playing by the rules." "Everyone has that choice," I countered. "You just don't like the work and patience it requires." As our visiting time neared its end, Bradley made one last attempt to manipulate me. "If you really care about Mom and Dad, you'll drop the charges. They don't deserve this. They were just trying to help me." For a moment, I felt the familiar pull of guilt, the same guilt that had kept me tethered to this dysfunctional family dynamic for years. But this time, I recognized it for what it was, a tool of manipulation. "They made their choice," I said, standing up. "Just like you made yours. And now, I'm making mine." As I walked out of the jail into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the family I had always wanted but never truly had, and relief that I was finally freeing myself from the toxic bonds that had constrained me for so long. The pressure from extended family intensified in the days that followed. Aunts, uncles, cousins, many who had barely been involved in my life before now bombarded me with messages about blood being thicker than water and how real family forgives everything. Some friends sided with me, affirming that pressing charges was the right thing to do given the severity of the attempted fraud. Others suggested I was overreacting, that family disputes should be handled privately rather than through the courts. Throughout this storm of conflicting opinions, I held firm to my decision. This wasn't a simple family disagreement. It was a calculated criminal act that, if successful, would have cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars and my primary residence. The fact that the perpetrators were related to me didn't diminish their culpability. If anything, it made their actions more reprehensible. Despite my resolve, the emotional toll was immense. I started seeing a therapist to help process the complex emotions of family betrayal. She helped me understand that my parents' behavior reflected their own issues, not any failure on my part to be a good son. She introduced me to the concept of familial entitlement, the belief some family members hold that they have an inherent right to another's resources simply because of blood ties. "What you're experiencing is a painful but necessary boundary setting," she explained during one session. "For perhaps the first time, you're saying that being family doesn't grant unlimited access to your resources or exempt them from respecting your autonomy." Those words resonated deeply, helping me stand firm even as the court date approached and the pressure to drop charges intensified. I wasn't just protecting my house. I was establishing that I deserved the same respect and consideration that my parents had always automatically granted to Bradley. And that realization, painful as it was, marked the beginning of my true independence from the unhealthy family dynamic I'd been entangled in for 28 years. With the preliminary hearing approaching, I decided to take a more proactive approach rather than simply reacting to my family's actions. On my lawyer's advice, I began gathering more information about Bradley's past to establish a pattern of fraudulent behavior. My first step was tracking down his ex-wife, Tanya. After some online searching, I found her working at a real estate office in a neighboring city. I called and asked if she would meet me for coffee, explaining briefly that it concerned Bradley's legal troubles. To my surprise, she agreed immediately. The woman who greeted me at the coffee shop bore little resemblance to the few photos I'd seen of her and Bradley together. In those images, she had appeared strained and tired. Now, she looked healthy and confident, with a clear gaze that met mine directly. "Thank you for meeting me," I said after we'd ordered our coffees. "I know this might be uncomfortable." "Actually, I've been hoping someone from Bradley's family would reach out eventually," she replied, "though I assumed it would be your parents asking for money again." This caught me off guard. "My parents asked you for money?" Tanya laughed without humor. "Multiple times. Usually for one of Bradley's business ventures or to cover his legal fees. I stopped answering their calls after the divorce." "Legal fees?" I repeated. "For his fraud conviction?" "Among other things," she confirmed. "DUIs, assault charges from bar fights, credit card fraud. Your brother has quite the rap sheet." I sat back, processing this information. My parents hid all of this from me. "That doesn't surprise me," Tanya said, stirring her coffee. "They've been covering for him since before I met him. I only discovered the extent of it after we were married." As our conversation continued, Tanya painted a disturbing picture of my brother that contradicted everything my parents had told me. According to her, Bradley hadn't been finding himself or experiencing bad luck. He had been deliberately exploiting others, including her, for years. "He emptied our joint account 3 times, she said. "Each time he had an excuse. A business opportunity that couldn't wait. A friend in desperate need. Once, he claimed his wallet had been stolen, and he needed quick cash. I later found receipts for a weekend in Las Vegas. The most shocking revelation came when I mentioned the children Bradley had claimed were his responsibility." Tanya's expression hardened. "What children? We never had kids. Bradley didn't want them, said they would interfere with his entrepreneurial lifestyle. He told my parents and me that he was helping raise your children from a previous relationship," I explained. "He used that as part of the justification for needing my house." She shook her head in disbelief. "I don't have children. I've never been married before Bradley. That's a complete fabrication." This lie was perhaps the most disturbing of all. Bradley hadn't just exaggerated or twisted the truth, he had invented fictional children to manipulate my parents and me. And my parents, either knowing it was a lie or failing to verify such a significant claim, had used these non-existent children to pressure me into giving up my home. Before we parted, Tanya agreed to provide a written statement about Bradley's history of deception and fraud, which could be used to establish his pattern of behavior in court. My next step was contacting some of Bradley's former business associates and roommates. Through social media and mutual connections, I managed to speak with 5 people who had experienced Bradley's manipulative tactics firsthand. Jorge, who had briefly partnered with Bradley on a food truck venture, described how Bradley had taken investors' money for equipment that was never purchased. Stephen, a former roommate, recounted discovering credit cards opened in his name after Bradley had accessed his personal documents. Each story followed the same pattern: trust established, then systematically abused for financial gain. Armed with these testimonies and working closely with Detective Simmons, I compiled a comprehensive documentation of Bradley's fraudulent history. The detective also uncovered evidence that my parents had been aware of most of these incidents, often paying restitution to victims to prevent charges from being filed. In many ways, Detective Simmons told me, "Your parents have been facilitating his behavior by shielding him from consequences." As the court date approached, my lawyer presented me with an unexpected option. Given the overwhelming evidence against them, the prosecutor was offering my parents a plea deal. They could receive reduced charges and possibly avoid jail time if they testified about Bradley's role as the primary architect of the scheme. "It's your decision," my lawyer explained. "If you support this arrangement, It would likely result in your parents receiving probation and restitution payments rather than incarceration. Bradley, given his history, would still face significant prison time. The offer presented a moral dilemma. On one hand, I didn't want to see my elderly parents in prison. Despite everything, the thought of them behind bars for years gave me no satisfaction. On the other hand, they had willingly participated in a serious crime against their own son. Did they deserve leniency? After careful consideration, I decided to support the plea deal for my parents, with specific conditions. They would need to undergo psychological counseling, particularly focused on their enabling relationship with Bradley, and they would have to make a full admission of guilt rather than minimizing their actions. The day of the hearing arrived with a sense of grim finality. As I entered the courtroom, I saw my parents sitting with their lawyer, both looking diminished in their formal attire. Bradley sat separately with his public defender, his expression alternating between defiance and fear. The proceedings began with the presentation of evidence: the forged documents, the notary's testimony, the security footage, and the extensive documentation of Bradley's previous fraudulent activities. As each piece was entered into record, I could see my parents' expressions changing from defensive to defeated as they realized the full extent of what they had participated in. When it came time for statements, Bradley's lawyer attempted to portray him as a struggling individual who had made mistakes out of desperation rather than malice. This narrative crumbled when the prosecutor presented evidence of Bradley's elaborate lies about non-existent children and his extensive planning of the fraud. Then came the moment that truly changed everything. The prosecutor asked my mother directly, "Mrs. Montgomery, did you know that your son Bradley had fabricated the existence of children as part of his justification for needing Rufus's house?" My mother looked genuinely confused. "The children aren't real?" she asked, looking first at the prosecutor, then at Bradley, whose eyes were now fixed on the floor. "But we've been sending child support money for 3 years. $500 a month for Tanya's children." The revelation sent a ripple through the courtroom. Not only had Bradley invented fictional children to justify taking my house, but he had apparently been collecting child support from my parents for years for these non-existent dependents. My father's face transformed as the truth sank in. For the first time, I saw him looking at Bradley, not with indulgence or protection, but with the dawning realization that he had been systematically manipulated by his favorite son. When it was my father's turn to speak, his voice was hollow. We believed everything he told us, about the children, about his business failures being due to bad partners, about his ex-wife taking advantage of him. We believed him because we wanted to believe him. He turned to look at me directly for the first time that day. "And we failed to believe in you, Rufus, even though you never gave us reason to doubt." Bradley's facade finally cracked when he realized his parents were no longer defending him. He stood up abruptly, pointing at me. "This is all your fault," he shouted. "If you had just given me the house like you were supposed to, none of this would have happened." The outburst prompted the judge to call for order. As security personnel moved toward Bradley, he continued his tirade. "He's always been the favorite. Mom and Dad just felt sorry for me. They've always loved him more." This bizarre inversion of reality, claiming I had been the favored child when every action of my parents had demonstrated the opposite, seemed to be the final evidence my parents needed. As Bradley was escorted from the courtroom, my mother wept openly, while my father sat with his head in his hands. The judge accepted the plea agreement for my parents: 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, community service, and restitution payments. For Bradley, given his prior convictions and the severity of this fraud attempt, the sentence was more severe: 5 years in state prison with no possibility of early release. As we left the courtroom, my parents approached me hesitantly. "We don't expect forgiveness," my father said, "but we want you to know we understand now. We see what we did not just with the house, but throughout your life. We were blind," my mother added, "and that blindness hurt you again and again." I couldn't offer forgiveness in that moment. The wound was still too fresh. the betrayal too profound. But I did tell them something true. I hope you get the help you need to understand why this happened. For your sake, as much as mine. As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting, not completely gone, but lighter than it had been in months. The truth had finally been exposed. Not just about the attempted theft of my house, but about the dysfunctional family dynamic that had enabled it. My brother would face real consequences for perhaps the first time in his life. My parents would have to confront their role in creating the monster they had protected for so long. And I, for the first time, had stood firmly for my own worth and refused to be sacrificed on the altar of Bradley's endless needs. It wasn't the victory I had ever wanted, but it was perhaps the one I had always needed. 6 months passed before I heard from my parents again. In that time, I focused on healing. The therapy sessions that had begun as crisis management evolved into deeper work, examining the patterns I had internalized from my family, the tendency to doubt my own worth, the guilt I felt when establishing boundaries, the belief that love meant endless sacrifice. My house, once a source of simple pride, had become a complicated symbol. Sometimes I would sit on my back porch and remember that my own parents had tried to take it from me. Other times, I would feel a surge of righteous validation. This was the house I had saved for, worked for, protected. It represented my independence and self-worth in concrete form. I had just finished renovating the kitchen when my phone rang with my mother's number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something, curiosity perhaps, or the progress I'd made in therapy, made me answer. "Rufus?" My mother's voice sounded different, smaller, but somehow clearer than I remembered. "I know you probably don't want to hear from us, but your father and I were hoping we could meet, just to talk." I hesitated, memories of their manipulations surfacing. "What do you want to talk about?" "Everything," she said simply. "The court case, Bradley, how we treated you growing up. We've been in therapy, like the court ordered. It's opened our eyes to a lot of things." After discussing it with my own therapist, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. I arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of the entrance. When my parents walked in, I was struck by how much older they looked. My father's shoulders were stooped, his hair noticeably grayer. My mother had lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. They approached tentatively, as if unsure of their welcome. "Thank you for meeting us," my father said as they sat down. No hugs, no presumption of immediate reconciliation. It was a small sign of respect for boundaries that I hadn't expected. "How have you been?" I asked, unsure where to begin. "Struggling," my mother admitted, but in ways that were long overdue. She reached for my father's hand. "The counseling has been difficult, confronting truths about ourselves that we spent decades avoiding." "Like what?" I pressed. My father cleared his throat. "Like how we consistently prioritized Bradley's wants over your needs. How we enabled his worst behaviors while taking your achievements for granted. Our therapist calls it dysfunctional triangulation," my mother added. "We used you as the responsible one, the stable one, while pouring resources into Bradley as the problem child. It wasn't fair to either of you, in different ways." "It wasn't," I agreed, surprised by their insight. It made me feel like I was only valued for what I could provide, not for who I was. "We know now how wrong we were," my father said, "both in how we raised you boys and in what we did with the house. There's no excuse for that. It was criminal, plain and simple." As our conversation continued, they revealed more about their current circumstances. The legal fees had depleted their savings. My father had taken a part-time job to supplement his retirement income. They were selling their house, too much space for them now, they said. But I suspected financial necessity was the real reason. "We're not telling you this to make you feel sorry for us," my mother said, seeming to read my thoughts. "We're facing the consequences of our actions, and that's appropriate." "What about Bradley?" I asked. Do you still hear from him?" They exchanged glances. "He writes. Sometimes," my father admitted. "Always asking for money for his commissary account or legal appeals. We've stopped responding." "That must be hard for you," I said, recognizing that despite everything, they did love him. "It is," my mother acknowledged. "But continuing to enable him would be harder in the long run. For everyone." As our coffees grew cold, my father finally addressed what I sensed was the real purpose of the meeting. "Rufus, we've lost our home and most of our savings. We're not asking you to fix that it's our responsibility, but we could use some advice about affordable housing options. You know more about real estate than we do." It was a humble request, not for money or shelter, but simply for information. A request that acknowledged my expertise, rather than demanding my resources. It was perhaps the first time in my adult life that they had approached me as a fellow adult, rather than as an extension of themselves or a counterbalance to Bradley. I considered for a moment. "I can help with that," I said finally. "I know some good resources for senior housing, and I could look over any rental agreements before you sign." Relief washed over their faces. "Thank you," my mother said. "That would mean a lot." As we prepared to leave, my father hesitated. "We know we don't deserve your forgiveness, Rufus, or even your help, but we want you to know that we are truly sorry, not just for the house incident, but for failing you throughout your life in ways we're only now beginning to understand." It wasn't a perfect apology. Years of damage couldn't be undone with a single conversation. But it was genuine in a way their previous attempts at reconciliation hadn't been. There was no manipulation, no expectation that family ties would automatically erase the harm they had caused. Over the following months, our relationship entered a new phase. I helped them find an affordable apartment in a senior living community. We began having dinner together once a month, not out of obligation, but as part of a careful rebuilding process. They respected my boundaries, never asking to visit my house, understanding that some spaces needed to remain mine alone. Bradley continued to write them angry letters from prison, demanding support and blaming everyone but himself for his situation. When they shared these with me, with my permission another new boundary respect, I could see how their responses had changed. They acknowledged his feelings without accepting his distortions. They offered emotional support without financial bailouts. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As for me, the experience transformed my understanding of family. Blood ties, I realized, didn't automatically confer rights or obligations. True family, whether related by DNA or by choice, was built on mutual respect, honesty, and healthy boundaries. Sometimes protecting yourself from toxic family members was the most loving choice you could make, not just for yourself, but ultimately for them as well. My house remained mine not just legally, but emotionally. The place that had once felt tainted by betrayal gradually reclaimed its status as my sanctuary. I finished the renovations I had planned, planted a garden in the backyard, and eventually began dating someone who understood and respected my complex family history. Sometimes I think about the parallel lives that could have unfolded. One where I surrendered my house to avoid conflict. Another where I cut all contact with my parents after the court case. Neither would have led to the nuanced healing that actually occurred, a healing built not on forgetting the past, but on ensuring it wouldn't dictate the future. The greatest lesson I learned through this painful journey was that sometimes setting firm boundaries isn't just an act of self-protection, it's an act of courage that can ultimately lead to healthier relationships for everyone involved. By refusing to participate in the dysfunctional patterns my family had established, I created space for something new and potentially better to emerge from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Life rarely offers perfect resolutions. My relationship with my parents remains a work in progress. Bradley continues to resist accountability. The wound of betrayal hasn't completely healed, but I've found peace in accepting this imperfection, in embracing the messy reality rather than clinging to idealized notions of what family should be. Sometimes, the most profound love we can show is the willingness to stand firm in our truth, even when those we care about are asking us to compromise it. My house stands as a testament to that principle, not just a structure of wood and stone, but a monument to self-worth that I fought to protect. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who couldn't respect your independence? What did you learn from the experience? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember, standing up for yourself doesn't mean you don't love your family sometimes. It's the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own family journeys.